Hey there everybody, it's Mark Crilly. I'm back with another How to Draw video. Today we're going to be talking about composition. And what I've done is put in a drawing of a kind of very flat western landscape. And I've cut out little pieces of different figures with an attempt to show you how an artist might come up with different compositions. That is to say, where these things are located within the frame. So let's begin with, putting this horseback dude right in the dead center. This, of course, qualifies as a composition, and it's very balanced, and it is among your options. And of course, you are free to begin drawing. I'm moving this around as a way of showing you, but if you, as an artist, you would be doing a series of quick sketches, maybe, comparing what does it look like in different locations. And, some people who study composition like to use what's called the golden ratio or the golden mean. And you can sort of Google that if you want to look into that further. I am more into the idea of creating compositions by way of instinct, by way of your own artistic instinct, rather than any kind of mathematical formula. I believe that the golden ratio would have this figure somewhere around here, let's say, with this amount of space here and this amount of space there. Of course, you could flip it around, and this also would be following the golden ratio. Something like that. But to be honest, I just have never really gotten into that approach to the degree to which I can say with confidence, okay, yeah, that's it, or whatever. It's somewhere in this area is what you will typically see when people are looking for a composition that is pleasing to the eye. Now, just for fun, let's start talking about what happens when you bring in one other item. And what I'm doing here actually is very purposefully putting the tree and the horseback rider in this super symmetrical, balanced position. And nothing in this video, you're never going to have me saying this is wrong or this is right. But I would point out to you that it's fairly unusual to see a composition like this, that is so balanced, so, with these two items that are roughly the same size and height in exactly the, paired locations to the right and left. To me, it reminds me of sort of surrealist paintings and stuff like that, where there is this heightened realism, this sort of decidedly odd feeling about, wow, why are they in these? It seems a little unnatural. I would expect things to be just a little, like if you move these both over here, it still looks a little weird to me, frankly, because these items are so close to being the same size. But it becomes a little more of a traditional artistic composition, I'd say. Now, what I wanted to do is show if we get away from these two items being exactly the same size, already we get away from that awkwardness, even if we place them in that sort of same symmetrical location, that it doesn't feel quite so strange to look at. And again, this is all personal taste. Some of you might say, that doesn't look strange to me at all. I think it looks great. And that's what I love about the topic of composition, is that it's all comes down to opinion, I feel. And, like one thing that you very rarely see in compositions is to have everything way over on one side, let's say, like this, and nothing over here, okay? That is dramatically different approach to composition. And again, I wouldn't say it's wrong. Nothing is wrong, but it's very rare to see a painter, like if you go to the art museum and look throughout history, you're not going to see very many compositions like this one, just because it feels so strange. It feels lopsided, right? And then I thought I'd do, just for fun, the third version, in which the tree is considerably larger, and of course that means it's in the foreground. And I've made it so that it breaks through. Let me look in my video visor, trying to get this lined up, so that it sort of breaks the upper border. And this is one thing that I think is a great option for creating compositions, and that is breaking through one or more of the edges of the frame. And that is indeed what you will see very often in comics. And you could even have him be dead center, but as long as this tree is off to the side, it's not going to feel strange to see him in the dead center. Again, strange it's a matter of opinion, but it is interesting. As I feel, as you break through the frame, it becomes a little more pleasing to the eye. And I think this horseback rider can look good in a variety of positions. But for me, the fun, and especially in having done this sort of cutout version, is we can just second by second start playing with different elements. Like, let's say we've got the sun setting. And for me, typically when I'm doing a composition, I like to have 3 different elements. You get this sort of triangle between the 3 different elements. And so if I was doing say this was a comic book panel and I had just these 2 things, I would be very tempted to get something else in there, and the sun, or the moon, I suppose, depending on what you decide this is going to be, becomes an interesting way of, to me, finishing off that composition. And you could put it almost anywhere. You could put it down here if you want to. But this seems a little odd to me, frankly, to put the moon or the sun way over there, let's say, and put him way over there, and you end up with this very huge empty space here. You're not going to see that too often. But anyway, that's enough of that sort of tree thing. I thought I could move on to, well, let's go ahead and see what happens with a 4th thing. I've done some cacti here. And since we've gone to 1, 2, 3 different items, now we've got 4 items. And of course, there's no end to the number of items that you can put together. Again, bunch everything together in one spot, starts to feel awkward, starts to feel strange. The fun, I think, for the artist is in playing around with different locations. And again, you'd probably be doing this mostly with pencil and paper, doing little quick sketches, saying what looks... Now, here's another thing, is when things get lined up, for example, that is a slightly awkward thing that artists tend to avoid, right? Because your eye becomes a little startled by, wow, how that's so strange that these things are lining up so perfectly. I'm not saying it's wrong. It might be a deliberate choice. You may choose to create a composition like that for a certain effect that you're going for. But typically, artists are going to pull these things apart and start saying, what happens when I create, as I said, this sort of triangular composition between them. Now, I even created 2 more of these cacti so that we could really start playing around with, different locations within the frame. These things are actually so similar in height that I'm finding it a little strange for them to be like right next to each other. For me, it might be a little more pleasing. I'm going to get rid of him for a second and see how does it look, if we get, whoops, the sun flipped over. Somebody help the sun. It's interesting to sort of play around and see when does it start to look good to you. It is odd to do actually a composition that doesn't have the horseback rider in it. We sort of expect the horseback rider to be in there at some point. But again, the similarity in height becomes a slightly awkward thing. I think you'll find that artists want to have a more dramatically different height between the different objects. Now, one thing that is making this sort of a very plain composition is this flat ground. And so I created here a foreground area of rocky soil or whatever that is closer to us. And already, I think you feel that this is turning into a composition because you've got this foreground element that's breaking through the left and the right-hand side of the frame. Let's go ahead and get old man cowboy back into the frame. Oh boy. And so this to me looks much more like a traditional composition that sort of tried and true that I've seen. You know what I mean? And again, put the moon or the sun right above him. Already we start to feel a little strange. Why is that right there? Shouldn't you sort of space these things out? And as I said, I like the artistic aspect of there not being any rules, of it coming down to your own sense of what looks good. And each artist is going to, some artists are famous for their dramatic, bold compositions. Some artists prefer a more symmetrical effect, and so they do sort of get everything more or less perfectly balanced. I even made some clouds. You can see that I just went all out with... I couldn't resist. Now, one thing that I thought I would show you just for fun in terms of compositions is you can reach a point where there are too many elements, at least to my eyes, and it ends up feeling kind of crowded. This, to me, is not a very satisfying composition just because I feel like there's no space for things to breathe. You know what I mean? We've got, and I'll even jam in this tree, and at this point I feel like, yeah, wow, maybe I would rather remove some of these elements because it's, I think you can overload a composition. It's almost like overworking a drawing. And then the last thing I wanted to show you, and this is maybe the boldest of them all, is what if you decide to have a fence right there in the foreground. I've tried to cut this so that it'll fit right in there. I hope it's showing up that way as a compositional element. Now, when you're watching a Hollywood movie, I think you'll agree, you've seen this kind of thing. And you can almost imagine the photographer and the director saying, come on, let's get over here on this side of the fence and shoot this through the fence, because it's gonna make a bold visual statement somehow. And why? Because this is breaking through 1, 2, 3, 4. All 4 sides of the frame are being interrupted by this foreground element, and I think you can see that it just visually much more dramatic than this. Not to say that this is undramatic. It just has a different feeling. This becomes, you get that foreground element in there, and suddenly things just... Well, you got a frame within a frame, I suppose. And just when you get that distant background, he's in the midground, this is in the extreme foreground, there's something kind of pleasing about that. I think almost anyone would agree. And that probably is going to bring me to the end of my little video about composition. Let me know what you thought of this video, about my approach in this video of, showing something by way of using these elements that I created before the video even started, so as to be able to play around with things again and again throughout the entire video, so as to, I bet I showed you 20 or who knows, maybe 30 different variations by the time it was all done, as we kept shifting and moving things around. I thought it might be a nice way of teaching this, and I hope you'll agree. Well, hold on, give me a few seconds. I'm going to go grab my books, so I can say thank you to anyone who has supported me by getting them. The Drawing Lesson, my graphic novel that teaches you how to draw. There's a whole chapter in this book devoted to creating compositions. Mastering Manga, also a little bit about that in terms of creating comic book frame compositions. And finally, The Realism Challenge, my book on hyper-realistic illustrations. I really cannot say thank you enough to those of you who choose to support me by getting any of those books. It really does mean a lot. But I suppose it's time for me to lay down this cactus. I want to thank you all for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it. And I'll be back with another one real soon.